Everyone thinks they know what an old watch is worth. They're wrong. Somewhere in America right now there's a drawer. Maybe it's in a parent's dresser. Maybe it's a grandfather's cigar box. Maybe it's sitting in a thrift store bin marked $5. Inside that drawer is a watch a baby boomer bought in 1968, wore to work for 20 years, and eventually forgot about. In some cases, that forgotten watch is now worth more than the car it was once traded in for. This isn't a story about luxury alone. This isn't just a Rolex story. This is a story about how an entire generation unknowingly built one of the most undervalued collector markets in the world, and most of them never found out. Baby boomers didn't buy watches to invest. They bought them because a watch was a rite of passage, a graduation gift, a wedding present, a reward for a first job. Nobody in 1965 thought a $40 diver's watch would someday sell for four figures. But that's exactly what's happening in auction houses, online forums, and quiet estate sales across the country. Here's what almost everyone misses. Value in the watch world has very little to do with what a brand costs today. It has everything to do with rarity, history, and what collectors have decided matters. Some of the most boring names your grandfather ever wore are hiding real money. We're going through 10 of them. We're saving the biggest name for last, but the story doesn't start there. It starts with the brand nobody expects. Number 10, Timex. For most people, Timex is shorthand for cheap. It's the watch you grab at a drugstore when your real watch breaks. That reputation isn't wrong. For decades, Timex built its identity on being affordable, durable, and everywhere. Takes a licking and keeps on ticking wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise of toughness over prestige. That's only half the story, though. Buried inside Timex's catalog are pieces collectors now compete for. The vintage Timex Marlin, a simple mechanical dress watch from the 1960s, was eventually reissued because collectors kept asking for it, and original 1960s models in good condition now sell in the low thousands. Military-issued Timex field watches carry a historical weight no marketing budget can manufacture. And then there's the oddest example of all, vintage Timex Mickey Mouse watches from the 1950s and 60s, especially in original packaging, have sold for surprising sums at specialty auctions, some pristine examples crossing well into four figures. Here's the psychology at work. Collectors aren't just buying a mechanism. They're buying nostalgia, scarcity, and a story. A brand everyone dismissed becomes exciting precisely because nobody was paying attention. While serious collectors chased Rolex through the 1990s, almost nobody preserved Timex boxes and paperwork, which means complete original sets are genuinely rare today. Rare, even in a cheap brand, still means valuable. That's lesson 1. Value doesn't follow prestige. It follows scarcity. Number 9, Citizen. Citizen has an identity problem in America. It's associated with mall kiosks and reliable quartz watches under $200. But Citizen's history in Japan tells a different story, one most American boomers never noticed at the time. Take the Citizen Bullhead, a chronograph from the early 1970s with its crown and pushers unusually placed on top of the case, built with motorsport use in mind. At the time, that made it a niche oddity. Today, that oddity is exactly why collectors want it. It looks like nothing else Citizen, or almost anyone else, was making in that era. Then there are Citizen's early automatic divers from the late 1960s, built to compete directly with Seiko but produced in far smaller numbers. Smaller production runs from 50 years ago mean fewer survivors today, and fewer survivors mean rising prices whenever a clean example surfaces. So the assumption most people carry, Citizen equals budget, is true for maybe 90% of the catalog. The exception is where the money lives. Collectors don't care what a brand costs at the mall today. They care what a specific reference, from a specific decade, in specific condition, represents in the story of watchmaking. Citizen has more of those hidden references than almost anyone expects. Number 8, Tissot. Tissot sits in an odd spot today, a respected Swiss name priced like an entry-level brand next to giants like Omega and Rolex. That's because Tissot has always marketed itself as accessible Swiss craftsmanship. But accessible in 2026 didn't mean accessible in 1962. In the 1950s and 60s, Tissot was producing genuinely high-end automatic movements, including early anti-magnetic and shock-resistant models that rivaled far pricier competitors. The C-Star and Visitate lines from that era were built to the same Swiss standards as brands charging significantly more. Boomers who bought a Tissot back then weren't settling, they were buying real engineering at a lower price. Here's the twist. Because Tissot never built the mainstream prestige of Omega or Rolex, Most of its vintage pieces were treated as everyday watches rather than heirlooms. They were worn hard, serviced cheaply, rarely preserved. That means well-kept examples today are unexpectedly scarce, and scarcity in a genuinely well-built vintage Swiss watch is exactly what collectors hunt for. Certain vintage Tissot chronographs and complicated pieces from this era now comfortably clear four figures. Same pattern again. An underestimated brand, real engineering, decades of neglect that accidentally created scarcity. Number 7. Hamilton. Hamilton carries something the others on this list don't. A distinctly American identity, at least for its first half-century. Founded in Pennsylvania, Hamilton built its early reputation on railroad-grade precision, the kind of accuracy that mattered when a few seconds of error could mean a train collision. That wasn't marketing. That was the industry standard Hamilton had to meet. But the piece that changed everything came in 1957, the Hamilton Ventura, the world's first electric watch, with an angular, futuristic case unlike anything else being made at the time. Boomers who bought a Ventura in the late 50s weren't just buying a watch, they were buying a piece of the future. And it wasn't only stylistically ahead of its time, it was technologically ahead of it, using a battery-powered movement years before quartz became standard. Original 1957-1963 Venturas in working condition, with correct battery compartments and cases, now command five-figure prices at specialty auctions. Even later Hamilton electric models, more common but still historically significant, regularly sell in the thousands. Hamilton proves a different point than Timex or Citizen. Sometimes value isn't about scarcity born from neglect, it's about genuine innovation that collectors want physical proof of. Owning a Ventura means owning the birth of a technology category. Number 6. Longines. Longines occupies a strange space in American memory. Recognized, respected, but rarely understood. It's one of the oldest watch brands still operating, and through the mid-20th century, it was genuinely considered among the finest watchmakers in the world, going head-to-head with names people now treat as untouchable. The Longines Conquest, launched in the mid-1950s, was built to prove precision and durability under real-world conditions, at one point holding chronometry results that rivaled brands charging far more. The Ultra Chron, released in the mid-1960s, was engineered as one of the most accurate automatic movements of its era. Here's the problem most people don't realize. Longines later made the strategic choice to reposition itself as a mid-range, accessible brand. That decision protected the company financially, but it also erased public memory of how serious Longines watches once were. The result, vintage Longines from the 50s and 60s get judged today against the brand's current mid-range identity, not its historical one. That mismatch is exactly why prices remain surprisingly reasonable for the quality involved, and why serious collectors consider vintage Longines one of the best value plays in the entire vintage market. Rare chronograph models and early ultrachron references typically sell between $800 and $4,000, with exceptional examples going well beyond that. Number 5. Bulova. If one brand defined the American watch-buying experience for boomers, it's Bulova. It was the graduation gift. It was advertised relentlessly during baseball broadcasts. For millions of families, it was the first real watch a young person ever owned. But Bulova's most important contribution wasn't marketing. It was the Accutron, launched in 1960, the first watch in the world to use a tuning fork movement instead of a traditional balance wheel, producing a distinctive hum instead of a tick, with accuracy mechanical watches of the time simply couldn't match. Accutron movements were used in NASA spacecraft timing instrumentation, documented aerospace history, not brand mythology. It looks like an ordinary product of its era until you realize what's actually inside. The original Accutron Space View, with its exposed movements showing the tuning fork mechanism, was considered strange and overly technical when it launched. A niche product for people who wanted to see the engineering, not just wear it. That same strange design is precisely why Spaceview models now command some of the highest prices in the Bulova catalog, with rare configurations reaching well into four figures. Add the Bulova Devil Diver and early Oceanographer, genuine tool watches built for real 1960s diving, and you get a brand where everyday American and genuinely important watchmaking turn out to be the same thing. Number 4. Seiko. Seiko might be the most misunderstood brand on this list. In America, boomers knew Seiko as reliable, affordable, and Japanese, good quality, fair price, nothing exciting. That was accurate for the mainstream catalog. It was completely wrong about what Seiko was doing at its highest levels. Through the 1960s and 70s, Seiko ran an intense internal rivalry between its Suwa and Daini manufacturing divisions, each pushing to outdo the other in precision, innovation, and design. That rivalry produced watches like the 6105 Diver, worn on screen by a lead actor in a major war film, and the 6139 chronograph, one of the earliest automatic chronographs in the world, worn in orbit by astronaut Colonel William Pogue on Skylab 4. Personal watch rather than NASA-issued equipment, but a genuine space-flown piece nonetheless. Then there's King Seiko, a line most Americans never knew existed, built specifically to compete with the finest Swiss movements, with finishing and accuracy that match watches costing many times more. Original 6105 divers now regularly sell for several $1,000s in good condition. Certain 6139 references, especially the Pogue, nicknamed after the astronaut, have sold for well over $10,000. The lesson here is sharper than with any brand before it. Seiko wasn't hiding quality behind a low price by accident. It was producing world-class watchmaking that simply never got the marketing budget or brand mythology Swiss competitors built for themselves. Collectors who understand horology, rather than just logos, have known this for years. Everyone else is only catching up now. Number 3. Omega. Omega's reputation as the Moonwatch brand is well-earned. But in a strange way, it undersells how deep Omega's vintage catalog actually goes. Everyone knows the Speedmaster went to the moon. Fewer people realize how many other Omega lines from the same era carry equally serious collector value. The Seamaster, introduced in the late 1940s, established Omega's reputation for real tool watch durability, waterproof, shock-resistant, built for use rather than display. The Constellation line was Omega's precision flagship, historically held to chronometer standards that placed it among the most accurate watches made anywhere in the world. The Speedmaster's NASA story is more remarkable than most people realize. NASA didn't choose Omega through marketing. It tested multiple chronograph brands under extreme heat, cold, vacuum, and vibration, without telling manufacturers what the test was for. The Speedmaster was the model that survived every stage. That's documented aerospace procurement history, not brand legend. The financial result is well known. Vintage Speedmasters from the 1960s regularly sell in the $10,000 to $50,000 range, with rare pre-moon configurations reaching well beyond that. The quieter story is what's happening with Seamasters and Constellations from the same period. Watches boomers bought as everyday luxury, now steadily climbing as more collectors realize the Speedmaster wasn't the only serious watch Omega made that decade. Number 2. Universal Genève. If the first 8 brands on this list are about hidden value inside familiar names, Universal Genève flips the story entirely. A brand almost nobody outside serious watch circles has heard of, which is exactly why its resurgence has been so dramatic. Through the mid-20th century, Universal Genève was considered one of the most technically accomplished Swiss watchmakers in the world, producing complications and chronographs that rivaled the most prestigious names of the era. The Polreuter, designed in the 1950s, and the Tricompax, one of the most complex chronograph movements of its time, represented genuine top-tier Swiss watchmaking. Boomers largely ignored it, not because it was inferior, but because Universal Genève never built the marketing machine that turned Rolex and Omega into household names in America. The watches were sold quietly, worn quietly, and eventually forgotten by a generation that didn't know what it had. Collectors didn't ignore it. As vintage buyers ran out of undervalued Rolex and Omega references to discover, they turned toward brands with genuine historical merit the mainstream market had overlooked. Universal Genève was near the top of that list. Rare Tricompax and Polreuter references now regularly sell between $5,000 and $20,000, with exceptional pieces occasionally exceeding that at international auction. This is the clearest example on the list of a simple truth. The market eventually corrects for quality, even when the generation that owned it never noticed. Number 1. Rolex. Everyone already knows Rolex is valuable. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is how completely most people misunderstand why, and how many boomers owned pieces that appreciated far beyond anything reasonable to expect from a watch bought on a normal salary at the local jeweler. A Rolex Submariner bought in 1968 for roughly $200, a real documented price at the time, can today, in original condition with correct dial and bracelet, sell for tens of thousands of dollars. A vintage GMT Master, originally built for airline pilots crossing time zones, now regularly commands 5-figure prices, with rare dial variations reaching into 6 figures at major auction houses. Even the date just, Rolex's most ordinary model, has vintage references from the 1950s and 60s that surprise collectors, particularly examples with unusual dial colors or original box and papers intact. Here's what most people miss about why this happened. Rolex's value isn't just brand prestige. It's a deliberate business decision the company made decades ago to control supply, even as demand kept growing beyond what it could produce. That scarcity, combined with genuine mechanical reliability that made these watches functional heirlooms rather than fragile luxury objects, built a collector's market unlike almost any other consumer product in history. The real lesson of this entire list, from Timex to Rolex, repeats at every scale. Value was never about what a watch cost when it was new. It was about scarcity, historical significance, and a market that took decades to notice what it already had. Somewhere, right now, there's still a drawer with a forgotten watch in it. Maybe it's a Timex. Maybe it's a Universal Genève nobody in the family has ever heard of. The only way to know what it's actually worth is to look closer than anyone in that family ever did. So tell us, what's the oldest watch sitting in your family, and who wore it first? Drop the brand and the decade in the comments. We might feature it in a future video.